Of the Native News Update. I'm your host for today's program, Paul Domain. Many of the stories viewed here can also be found at our websites at IndianCountryTV.com and IndianCountryNews.com. Here's the news read for the day from the Associated Press and other Native American news sources. Sentencing is scheduled August 24th for a Browning, Montana woman who pled guilty to theft from a tribal organization. Prosecutors say 25-year-old Wilma Hoyt pled guilty during mid-May before a federal judge in Great Falls. Prosecutors say that they were prepared to prove that Hoyt wrote $62,000 worth of bad checks on accounts of the Blackfeet Tribal Credit Department as part of a scheme during a 5-month span in the year 2008. Talk at the Community Center in this small Navajo town at Tonalia, Arizona isn't as focused on the economy as it is in many places off the reservation. That's because people living on the largest Indian reservation have been largely unscathed by the recession. Most Navajos own their own homes and tend not to invest in the stock market and have long had difficulties borrowing money, distinguishing them from millions of others Americans who suffered from rising mortgage payments, sinking 401k retirement accounts, and stricter terms from lenders. And with half of the Navajo Nation's workforce unemployed long before this latest recession hit, there's not much fear the job situation could get much worse on the reservation. That's not to say that the 200,000 people who live on the largest American Indian reservation have escaped untouched. Tribal officials are wrangling over how to address a $25 million budget shortfall, and requests for social services have prompted newspaper ads for more employees to handle them. The key has been the ability of the Navajo, who maintain traditional beliefs, to cope, and the attitude that allows them to preserve. The culture teaches them that wealth isn't measured by dollars and that the language, the land, and kinship are the greatest survival tools. For reservation resident Dolores Claw, that means leaning on traditional practices such as keeping livestock and growing corn to offset the rising cost of food. Other Navajos still sell hand-woven rugs at trading posts or jewelry and food at roadside stands and at flea markets that usually bustle with buyers. Saritha Largi, a freshman at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, is settling into a role as the college's Miss Haujoni. Saritha, a Navajo, officially assumed the title of Miss Haujoni earlier this spring following the Haujoni Days powwow. A new Miss Haujoni is selected every year after a week-long pageant that includes talent competitions and a question-and-answer session. Her role is to act as an ambassador for the Fort Lewis College there in Durango, Colorado, the FLC Native American Center, and Wambly Ota, the student organization that organizes Haujoni Days. The Miss Haujoni pageant is an annual tradition at Fort Lewis College dating back to 1966. Following introductions and the question and answer session, Saritha and the other contestant, Tony Platero, participated in several talent competitions as part of the pageant. Both contestants impressed the judges, but it was Saritha that received the crown at the powwow. As the runner-up, Tony will act as Ms. Haujoni's first attendant. The Nez Perce tribe will not take a position on a proposed land swap between the federal government and a private timber company until it can assess past cultural uses of the land and how the trade might impact the Treaty of 1855, the tribe's chairman says. Samuel Penny said a decision won't be made until the cultured inventories are finished, a process that includes tribal members submitting comments to the tribe's Cultural Resources Department. The treaty reserved the right for tribal members to hunt, fish, and gather on open and unclaimed lands on and off the reservation, but it's unclear how those rights would carry over if the land trade goes through. The tribe hasn't endorsed anything. We just agree that the land that is in question carries treaty reserved rights, Brooklyn Baptist, the tribe's executive committee vice chairman, told the Lewiston Tribune. The trade involves 39,000 acres of land owned by the Western Pacific Timber on the Idaho-Montana border for about 28,000 acres of U.S. Forest Service land in the Idaho Panhandle National Forest, Clearwater National Forest, and Nez Perce National Forest. Mark Lodine, an attorney for the U.S. Department of Agriculture based in Missoula, Montana, said federal officials are looking at whether the treaty rights extend to land once held privately and whether those rights carry over to land that shifts from federal ownership to private ownership. Cherokee Nation Principal Chad Smith praised two Oklahoma congressmen who have asked United States Attorney General Eric Holder to reject a request from other U.S. representatives to initiate an investigation into the citizenship laws of the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma. U.S. Representatives Dan Boren and Tom Cole wrote in a letter to Holder that, quote, it would be blatantly unconstitutional to investigate the supposed treaty violation without a judgment by the federal courts. To say the least, it would be premature for the Department of Justice to investigate an alleged violation of a right when the tribal and federal courts are still in the process of determining if such rights exist as claimed. The letter refers to litigation involving the Cherokee Nation in 2 federal courts, in addition to the Cherokee Nation Tribal Court. The cases center around the citizen status of the freedmen. The freedmen descendants, according to the Cherokee Nation news release, who gained citizenship between March of 2006 and March of 2007, a period of time when the Cherokee Nation Constitution allowed some non-Indians to become citizens. The tribe has more than 1,500 citizens who are descendants of freedmen, but who can also document Indian ancestors. According to the Cherokee Constitution, anyone who can document an Indian ancestor on the Dawes rolls can be a citizen of the tribe. Boren and Cole wrote of an understanding that had been reached among members of Congress to allow the courts to decide the status of non-Indian freedmen descendants in the Cherokee Nation instead of taking punitive legislative measures such as cutting hundreds of millions of dollars in federal assistance for health care, education, housing service, and other programs against a single Indian tribe. The Well-Brighty Journey for Forgiveness began Saturday, May 16th at the Chemawa Indian School in Salem, Oregon, with a turnout of over 100 participants. It continued on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation in the community of Warm Springs in Central Oregon on May 17th with a turnout of about 100 as well. The next event began the morning of Tuesday, May 19th at the Shoshone-Bannock Junior-Senior High School in Fort Hall, Idaho. And the path of that Well-Brighty journey is behind us up on the board. If you want more information on where that Well-Brighty journey is going and how to reach the people along the route, you can contact Laverne Beach at 208-478-3818 for more information on the Fort Hall and other future events. Skull and other bone fragments discovered last year in the home of an elderly British academic was handed over to the Australian government in a solemn Aboriginal ceremony on May 14th. The handover was part of Australia's efforts to recover Indigenous remains held across the world. The government has retrieved remains of more than 1,100 people from the United Kingdom specifically since 1990. Remains were sold to museums and trophy hunters in the 19th century, Australia's High Commissioner John Doss said. Spotted by Australian diplomats as they were being put up for an auction in November, the bones, a skull, a mandel, and several other fragments were found last summer by an auctioneer hired to clear out the academic's home. The auction was halted after Australia's High Commission in London intervened. And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank our underwriters for helping us with this broadcast and you for joining with us again. Miigwech.